Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michelle Rosado, and I work at the Connecticut Department of Education and working on the Connecticut SAT School Day. So welcome back to many of you that on the program before, and welcome to our new coordinator. Um, just going to let my colleagues introduce themselves before we get started. So, Deirdre.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deirdre Ducharme, and I support your SSD coordinators on providing accommodations and language supports to your English learners. And it's a pleasure to spend some time with you this afternoon. Thanks for joining.
Abe.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Abe Chris, Performance Office. Thanks for taking the time to come out today for the overview of the 2023 SAT Digital Admin. Thanks.
And Adrian, and then Keisha.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Cupper. I'm the Executive Director of Outreach and Implementation at the College Board, and I manage the Connecticut implementation, and I'm looking forward to working with everybody again this year.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keisha Smith. I'm the Senior Director for SSD Customer Service. I work closely with CSDE to support accommodations and EL supports for students.
Great. Sorry, it's just when you do this Teams, I don't know. In some ways, I don't like it. I'm complaining about it right now, but as soon as everyone comes, oh, it's hard to hear me. Okay, let me see if I can make myself louder. Is that better for everybody in terms of hearing me? Can you guys? Yes. Okay, great. Thanks, Kim, for letting me know. All right. So, reminders to everybody. Thanks for attending. And I believe, yes, we are recording. So this session is being recorded and it will be posted to the Connecticut SAT School Day website afterwards. And there is my contact information and Deirdre's. And just want to make your attention that we have a dedicated Connecticut SAT mailbox this year, or I think it started last year, but if you could make note of that new dedicated email box if you have questions that you want to ask directly of the College Board. And I'm just going to cover like the first one or two slides, and then Adrian is going to really do the bulk of the presentation. Again, I want to thank you for your work on this program in advance. I know it's a lot of work, but I do want to just mention that we did hear a lot of positive feedback last year when we switched from paper pencil to computer-based testing. Some of the positive feedback we got was there's a lot less counting. I mean, you don't have to count materials because everything's done digitally. When you're done, you're done. There's no boxing it up. There's no sending it back. So we did get quite a bit of positive feedback. I know there was a few glitches, and we can always work to have things, smoother for those of you that had glitches. And we did get a lot of feedback that we're, incorporating to the extent that we can this year. So you can see the test dates there. Just as a reminder, you're allowed to choose whatever date you want. You don't need to. Everybody does not need to test on the same day. You also don't need to test all your students on the same day. So you're welcome to choose any of those test days in the window that you need. So there aren't too many new things, but just to bring your attention to something that is changing within the College Board. And I'm going to let Adrian kind of jump in on this one as well. But the College Board, well, we are doing computer-based testing for the 2023 Connecticut SAT School Day, and we did that testing last year. This is actually different than the new digital that College Board will be rolling out starting in the fall of 2023. And for the purposes of SAT, it will be spring 2024 that will be using the new version of the digital SAT. You can see there's a little bit of information there, and we are going to be doing a webinar in the spring. So, Adrian, do you want to jump in here and then take over?
Sure. So as Michelle said, the current the current computer-based testing you're doing with College Board, we use the CAI testing platform. But for spring of 24, we're going to have our new kind of College Board digital testing platform. So that'll be a different experience. A lot of the things that you guys have recommended and asked for in terms of changes to digital testing for the SAT, we will be able to implement for spring of 2024. So just want to know that we've heard you. And as we build out our own new testing platform, we've been incorporating information and feedback we get from educators who are administering digital testing in their schools. So I just want you to know that we have heard you. We're doing a lot of work and making sure that what we roll out to everybody in spring of 24 has a lot of the kind of features and functions that you guys have been asking for. And yeah.
I just want to jump in because I see that Alec has his hand raised, and I'm not sure if I am able to call on you, but is there a way that you can just write your question in the chat? Maybe, and we can try to work through it that way. So why don't you keep going, Adrian, and we'll see if Alec's able to write in the chat. You're muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I see that I can move this. I don't know if it's going to change what people see. So I'm going to give it a shot. And is that moving what you guys see? No. So I think you're going to have to keep moving the slides, Michelle. No problem. So then let me pick up, let's see here. So yeah, so we're on the changes for 2023 slide. Is that right? Awesome.
We are, and we actually, Alec had a question.
Oh, great.
For the PSAT that's happening, it's actually fall of 23, Alec, not spring. That's when the new PSAT is going to roll out, the digital one. He wants to know how wide are the testing windows going to be, more days than just the single?
So I'm actually not 100% certain about the fall testing window. I know we've talked about it being a larger testing window when we move to the new digital SAT. But I know that information will be coming out probably in the early part of the spring or late part of the fall for you guys. Let's see here. Yeah, so we do understand though, Alec, I see in your note that it can take a lot of time as a large district to get secure browsers and things like that installed on devices. We're very aware of that, and so that's why we plan to have information that you're going to need, like I said, in the late winter, early spring time frame, so that you can then prepare for the following fall. Okay. So then I'm going to talk about the current year now, and we're going to talk about the current year for digital testing that we have going on. Like I said, this year, and this is the last year that the SAT that you're going to be giving on the computer will be on the CAI testing platform. So we're going to come back to that here. A couple changes for 2023 to let you know about. We have updated the NAR for the spring for spring 2023 testing. So there's some changes to the NAR, but I think the biggest thing and the thing that I think is going to help everybody the most is that the NAR is going to be available in both the PDF format that you're used to getting the NAR in, but then also the CSV format. And so you can download it. You can download it in a CSV format and use it in Excel or any other spreadsheet program that you may have, and that'll make it possible for you guys to be able to kind of sort and manipulate what's there to help as you're creating room rosters and making your plans. So we're excited that functionality has been added to the NAR. So that's super exciting. And then the NAR will also be available earlier than it has been in past years. So we're anticipating it in late January as we go into the spring, but you will be able to access that information earlier for your spring testing. So let's talk about, again, the Connecticut SAT Digital Overview. We for the last time in spring of 23 will be delivering the digital SAT in partnership with Cambium Assessments, so CAI. Schools that are testing digitally, so all the schools in Connecticut, must have all students test using the digital assessment, except for students who have an accommodation that requires a paper pencil test. And so we're going to talk more about that specific issue when we do our webinar for SSD coordinators. I believe it's next week. But all other students, unless students have an accommodation that requires a paper pencil test, will be testing digitally on the computer. Each student does have to complete all of the sections of the test in one day. So that's similar to kind of the paper pencil test, but everybody has to complete all the sections of the test in one day, unless the student has been approved for an accommodation that extends the testing time beyond one day. And as Michelle mentioned a little bit earlier, digital testing involves testing over a window. So you have a few, so in the primary testing window, you have 5 testing days. In the makeup testing window, there are 3 testing days, and schools can choose which days in the window they want to use. You can use multiple days in the window. So while an individual student needs to test on one day, if you want to break up your students into groups of students and have 30 kids test on one day in the window and 30 kids test on the next day in the window, that's fine. You can do it. The window testing is designed to give you whatever flexibility is that you need to choose testing days and how many days in that window that you would like to use. And as I mentioned, all students have to test on the same day. We do still offer, we had offered for the past couple of years, the kind of COVID-related flexibilities of staggered start times, so that you can have a group start at, let's say, 9 o'clock, and then another group start at, let's say, like 9:30, and to stagger them within your day. That still is an option too, if you'd like to use that. But students, unless they have an accommodation that that allows for testing for more than one day, students do need to complete the test in one day. So score reports are going to be made available in the same time frame as those that as what we've done for paper and pencil previously. So you will have score reports available towards the sometime in April, like mid-April-ish, I believe, for your students, and then a little bit later for yourself. And then in addition to the standard roles for testing that we've always had, and you had to deal with this last year, we also have the role of a technology coordinator, and that person is responsible for all of the technical setup tasks for the computers that's needed for digital testing. We're going to have a technology coordinator webinar in the January timeframe to go through all of those things that are needed. And the testing time does remain the same as paper pencil. There's no change to the actual length of the test. All right, so the roles that you need to make sure that you have someone for. So you need to make sure you have a test coordinator for your school, and that person's responsible for managing all of the aspects of the digital test. And if you have any students that do need to test with paper and pencil for an accommodation purpose, they'll also be the ones receiving those materials and having to prepare those. There is the SSD coordinator and also the ML/EL coordinator. In college, just so you know, in College Board systems, you'll see EL coordinator, but we know in Connecticut you talk about it as ML and EL coordinator. So that's how it is in this presentation. This coordinator is the person who makes sure to apply for accommodations, who may have disabilities, and set up the supports for students who may need multilingual or English learner supports. So not only is that information what gets put into SSD Online, but then also the SSD coordinator is the one who supports the test coordinator in making sure that accommodations and support configurations are done in the TIDE system. There's the technology coordinator, as I mentioned, that is a district or school staff person who's responsible for managing all of the technical readiness for your testing. Then there are proctors. So these are the folks that are in the classroom in charge of testing in a specific classroom. That proctor is the person that is overseeing testing in that room. And then there's the monitors. The monitors are folks that can either help in a testing room or in the halls to just help make sure that things are calm and secure on test day. So with our spring digital testing, CSDE is responsible for uploading a complete roster of students using the College Board's bulk registration system, and that's how your tests are essentially ordered, right? So you don't have to do any ordering of tests. CSDE provides us with the student information through our bulk registration system, and then And then when the Tide platform is available, that information flows in, so each school can see the students that are registered for their test. And then when that information is, when student data is available in Tide, then the test coordinator can go in and complete the digital readiness tasks, work with the SSD coordinator to configure Tide settings, accommodations or support settings for students, anything that needs to be done. But so CSDE provides us with the student data that flows through, and then you see it in the system. And that'll happen in the in February, when you will first start to be able to see student data.
Adrian, I just want to jump in here because some of you might be wondering, how do we get that data? Where does it come from? The state uses something called the Public School Information System, PSIS, and there are people in every single school district in the state who are responsible for managing the data about your students that attend your school. So while it's not a one-to-one match with systems like Power Schools, and there's a couple other ones that you use, like something Classroom. I don't know. There's other systems. It's not a one-to-one correlation with that. So sometimes there can be confusion when you see in your Power School that a student might be listed in grade 11, but then in Power School, for some reason, maybe they're still showing up in grade 10 or a different grade. That would be why they wouldn't show up in Tide. If something is incorrect in PSIS, it won't be correct in Tide because they're taking a file directly from PSIS. So we ask that you work closely with the person that's responsible, or persons that are responsible for maintaining your data system when you have new students move in and out, if you have students move grades because of credits, if you have students who have a change in gender or things like that we need to act on, you have to have them correct in PSIS. And also, we're pulling files at different times. We plan to pull more files this year because we know that it was sometimes not, it was hard because you'd make a change and then it wouldn't be seen in Tide for like a couple days, but you wanted to test. So we're going to work on that, and we're thinking that things will be different for the following administration, but we don't know anything. We really don't know how it's going to change. So anyway, okay. So I'm
Michelle,
sorry.
Michelle, if you don't mind, I'd just like
Yeah.
to make, I'd just like to add that for your 11th graders that qualify for alternate assessments, it is important to have your trained teachers submit the Connecticut alternate assessment eligibility form in the data entry interface between November 14th and December 23rd. And when this happens, this allows us to identify who those students are that should not be taking the SAT school day, and then we'll remove them from that initial file that we provide to the College Board in January. So please just communicate with your staff that works with this population to make sure that the December 23rd deadline is met. Again, just so we can avoid any confusion and make sure that only those kids that should be taking the SAT are included in that initial upload file.
And just wanted to say that we do provide files for PSIS on many different dates, and when we have the calendar of when we're going to be pulling the files, we'll share that with you as test coordinators so you're aware. And it happens during the test window, so it's not just once. So when students do change at different times during testing, we will make sure that you'll see that reflected. So we'll share that with you when we have that information.
Okay. We would move on to the next slide. I think we're good on this one. Great. Thanks. So as I mentioned, we use the CAI testing platform. The CAI test delivery system has 3 different applications that are used. There's the test information distribution engine, Tide, and that's what test coordinators use. And that's how they kind of manage the testing process through that system. There's the test administrator, or TA interface, and that's the system that proctors use to administer the test. And then there's the secure browser, and the secure browser is the interface that students use to take the test. So there are these 3 different applications that make up the CAI test delivery system overall. So let's first talk about the Test Information Distribution Engine, or TIDE. I'm going to just say TIDE from now on. Test coordinators, as I mentioned, they're the ones who use TIDE, and that's how test coordinators are able to kind of manage data within the system and configure test settings ahead of test day. And like I mentioned, there are for students that test with accommodations or supports, there will need to be some configuration set so that they get the right timing and the right supports and the right accommodations for their test. District test coordinators also have access to TIDE, and we can make sure that that district test coordinators can see there's a district administrator access to TIDE as well. Test coordinator functions in TIDE include creating staff accounts. So test coordinators will need to create the accounts for the proctors that are going to do the proctoring, and then so they'll need to have their accounts created. You need to do that every year. Each year the system is kind of wiped clean and it starts again. So you will need to, if the last time you did digital testing was last year, you will need to create the staff accounts again. Now, some schools, a number of schools, about 100 of them in Connecticut, have participated in fall PSAT 8-9 digital testing. And for anybody who did fall P8-9 digital testing, the staff accounts you created in there will remain from fall to spring. Okay, so you may, when you go into TIDE for your spring testing, you will see that anybody you've already created for the fall will still be in there for the spring. The other thing you can do is you can manage rosters in TIDE. You can monitor the digital test sessions. You can modify test settings for students with accommodations and supports, and you can print student test tickets from TIDE. And then there's a test administrator or TA interface. So proctors log in and use the TA interface to administer the test to students. In the TA interface, proctors can conduct a pre-administration session. They can create test sessions. They approve students to come in and test during the testing sessions. They monitor and manage test timing. And they monitor student test status. And then you can identify any students who may need assistance as well using the TA interface.
Adrian, someone asked a question about this, which I think I know the right answer, but can teachers be put into TIDE by a bulk method? You know, like how they submit the database and they can put them all in?
Yes, I am not sure, honestly, Michelle. I cannot remember that from last year.
You can conduct a you can conduct a bulk upload for not only your TIDE user rules, but then also for your students that may need the accommodations. So there are directions in the College Board TIDE user guide available on the College Board website, but I will download that manual and I'll post it in the link.
And
Great,
thanks,
thank you.
Jennifer, for jumping in. Jennifer did this last year and she said, yes, you can download the template into Excel or CSV.
Great.
Thanks.
Okay. So then there's the secure browser, and that's the student application. That's how students sign in and take the test. The secure browser, it secures the desktop and it restricts access to any prohibited applications while the student is testing, and then it collects the student responses and sends that information to the College Board so we can score their test. Now, for schools that are already using CAI systems, and we know that you administer Smarter Balance and NGSS, there are some things that'll be the same for you and some things that'll be a little bit different. Schools already using CAI systems and the secure browser to deliver other tests do need to complete technical setup tasks in order to administer the Connecticut School Day Assessment. So depending on the operating system, if we look at student testing applications, depending on the operating system on the student devices that you're using, you do need to install one of the applications below. So if you are running Windows or Mac OS machines, you do need to install the CB Secure browser for testing College Board tests, okay? So that it's different. It does not replace your state testing browser, so you can have both on the machines at once, but you do need the College Board secure browser to be able to administer the SAT school day in the spring. Now, if you are using Chromebooks and iPads, and you're using them for other CAI assessments, you don't need to install a new application, but you will need to change the organization and assessment settings in the secure test browser before students can access the test. So it's the same application, but you just need to change the settings if you're dealing with Chromebooks and iPads. Now for test coordinators and proctors, if you're already using CAI, testing staff will need to log in using separate URLs from those that you use for Smarter Balanced and NGSS. That's important to know. You're going to use separate URLs for logging in and using the test coordinator and proctor systems. Student data elements and permissions in TIDE may differ from those used in Smarter Balanced and NGSS. And you're going to actually have a different login overall for those of you for staff logging in. You're going to have a different account and login information for College Board tests. If you're testing the same students in your school across both assessments, and you have some that are taking Smarter Balanced and NGSS, and you're also testing them for digital SAT, they're going to be represented separately in the system. So they are, even though they're the same applications, they're actually different systems for data. And our data is separate than the data from the other assessments. So just know that you will, if you see a student in TIDE for NGSS, you may not see them in TIDE for College Board. We have a separate upload process, and our data is separate. So it's important to know. So we do have a bunch of resources available that can support you with planning for test day. So we'll be offering a bunch of sessions and things to help support you. So you'll see us again several times throughout the course of the year. But we also have a website, our digital testing portal, so digitaltesting.collegeboard.org, that has a bunch of resources that you can also access. That's also how you sign into TIDE. You go to that. You go to the College Board TIDE. You go to that website and you can sign into TIDE there. You can access the student digital test experience, the preview there. You can access the practice test and practice giving a digital test and the digital preview. So that all of that stuff is available at our digital testing portal.
Thanks, Adrian. Just want to jump in real quick there. We do have a couple more trainings that we're going to be doing. There's one next week for SSD coordinators, especially if you're new to that role. And then we're going to be doing one for tech coordinators probably in January. And then we're planning to do an in-person training either February 8th or 9th. If you want to participate, where you come and we actually will be able to answer your questions and see you in person, or you'll get a chance to either attend that training or do it online, whatever is easier for you. And of course, we'll be sending more information out about all of those trainings so that you can get them on your calendar as soon as possible. Deirdre, there was a question in the chat from Abby for you about entering accommodations.
So the best way to think about CT SEDS and the Connecticut SAT school day is that there is no syncing or communication between the CT SEDS system and the College Board SSD online. So it's important that you document your students' accessibility needs per their IEP and 504 in CT SEDS if you're doing that transition this year. But it's critical that for your students that are eligible for accommodations, that those accommodations are documented and approved through the College Board SSD system. And if you have any questions about that or need clarification, feel free to email me or call and I'll walk you through the process.
Okay, so let's talk about the test administration practice site. School staff can use the practice site that we have to simulate test day and get an experience of what it's like to administer the test, the digital SAT suite. So you can view an interactive proctor simulation. This helps proctors learn how to administer the TA interface. You can actually kind of watch it, and it's interactive. You can click through and kind of begin to build muscle memory as you look at it. The proctor simulation is available on that digital testing portal, and it's also something that in the springtime we will be sending out to folks as part of training options. You can also use the TA interface practice site with the student digital test preview to give kind of an experience of kind of simulating test day in your classroom. It provides kind of a realistic experience of how to start a test session and monitor students testing. It's not a full practice test, but it does give you the opportunity to kind of start that and practice it in your school if you're concerned that that your folks need some practice before test day. We also recommend that schools plan to incorporate these activities into your staff training so that staff are not just encountering these applications for the first time on test day. It'll make your test day go more smoothly if you give an opportunity to practice before test day. And then we have detailed instructions on kind of when and how you can practice a test administration, as well as a resource guide for that on the digital testing portal. So if you want to practice, you want to do a kind of a realistic simulation experience in your schools, the digital testing portal has that information on it. All right, so let's talk about getting your school set up for testing. So as I mentioned, we'll have a technology coordinator overview webinar that will take place in January, but here's some of the basic information you're going to need to know. We have on our digital testing portal, there's a digital preparedness step-by-step guide for technology coordinators and anybody who's beginning to prepare at your school to be able to use. And we have it set up in kind of two sections. There's part one where you're looking at your technology and setup and verifying that everything is kind of ready to go. And then there's actual test readiness and evaluation that we kind of walk you through as well. So this is available, as I mentioned, test coordinators can see it on the digital testing portal. Now, for test devices, let's talk a little bit about what is required of our test devices and the specifications you need. Devices have to meet and maintain the system requirements and technical specifications that are outlined in that step-by-step guide that I referenced in the previous slide. Schools must have the ability to install the secure browser application on all the test-taking devices that's needed to be able to give the test to students. Desktops, laptops, iPads, and Chromebooks are allowed. Devices have to connect to the internet. It's okay if it's wireless, or it can be wired connection, but there has to be an internet connection. The devices have to be school-owned. We do not support with CAI testing, we do not support using student-owned devices, so they have to be school-owned. Now, if there's school-owned devices that students are allowed to take home, that's fine, as long as the school owns them and supports the software applications on them. Devices have to be able to maintain a charge of at least 5 hours or be plugged into a reliable power source. Each testing room must have a dedicated device for the proctor, because the proctor will need to access the TA interface. So you need student devices as well as the proctor device in the room. And then students testing with approved assistive technology devices should pre-test that device in the secure browser using the student digital test preview mode before test day. So you want to make sure that students who may need to use assistive technology, you've practiced that, you've made sure it works before test day. So again, that test day is smooth for those students. So we provide on our digital testing portal a network diagnostic tool that you can use and that your tech coordinator can use to just make sure that you have the bandwidth needed to be able to support testing in your school. We really suggest that you run the network diagnostic tool ahead of test day. and then you do so in different testing rooms in the different rooms that you will be testing students, so that you can make sure that the bandwidth requirements are met in each of the room where your students will be testing. As I mentioned, all of this information and the network diagnostic tool itself is on the digital testing portal, so that you have the opportunity to go through and do that checking. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about students with accommodations. The digital test is designed and is accessible for students with accommodations. A few things to know. So requests for College Board accommodations have to be submitted into the SSD online system and go through that process. And then accommodations are available for students that have active documented IEPs and 504 plans. You can submit that information into the SSD online system for the Connecticut SAT School Day between November 14th and January 31st. Okay, and so you can submit that information for students who need accommodations and also those who need EL or ML supports. Okay, and we offer time and 1/2. That's the only, we offer 3 supports. The only one that needs to be entered into SSD online for students is time and 1/2, 3 EL ML supports. The students that already have an approved College Board accommodation in the paper testing mode that you may have from other assessments, if you did PSAT this year, PSAT in the fall, and you have students with approved accommodations, those remain approved for that student. And so you don't need to add a new request if a student already has approved accommodations. Those students will be provided an equivalent accommodation in digital testing. And so the only thing you would need to do if a student already has approved accommodations is if they need a change to those accommodations, then you need some sort of accommodation removed because they've had a change in their IEP, then you need to submit information. But if a student already has approved accommodations, you don't need to worry about submitting anything else. And then accommodated testing needs, you do need to do setup before test day. In the TIDE system, for a number of accommodations, especially those that affect testing time or what a student actually sees on the screen, schools do have to indicate in the system that the student is testing with accommodations, and then there are configurations that need to be set for in TIDE for students that are receiving things like extended time or EL support, time and 1/2, or whether it's an accommodation or a support, or if there are other things that are not embedded in the platform, you let us know that they're getting something that's not embedded in the platform. So there are configurations that need to be done before test day for students that are testing with accommodations. We will cover this in detail in the accommodations webinar that's coming up, as well as support when we get into the testing season and you have access to TIDE in February. We will also cover this in more detail. Okay, so let's talk about non-standard testing rooms. Students who require different timing or breaks will need to be tested in, or may need to be tested in, separate rooms. And so you're gonna, when you get your NAR, it's gonna provide information about testing rooms and testing groups. And that helps you determine how to set up rooms and where students can be assigned. Students that take the test with extended time or extra extended breaks, other accommodations that kind of affect that timing, should be assigned to a room with a proctor that's separate from those using the standard administration. You should seat students with the same type of timing and breaks together. So again, this may require multiple digital testing rooms, but it's really important to understand the timing that each student has as part of their accommodations. And then you want to provide appropriately configured test-taking devices and resources to support student accommodations. Students who are testing in the paper mode due to an accommodation, so those students who can't test digitally and have to have paper pencil testing, they also need to test in a separate room from digital test takers. The directions and things for their test are very different, and so they need to be tested separately. Test coordinators should be discreet when assigning non-standard testing rooms to avoid subjecting students to any unnecessary attention. And proctors who are managing rooms for students testing with accommodation should follow the accommodated scripts that are in the manuals that you receive. So you want to make sure that proctors are using the correct scripts for the timing that is being done in their room.
I just want to jump in here because this came up last year, and we'll have to make sure we clarify in an email. But some couple of coordinators last year needed help early in the morning, and they called the SSD number, and there was nobody there. So I think we want to clarify, like, what do I do when I've started testing at 7 o'clock in the morning and I need help?
Sure. So College Board staff on test days, so that's not only the first day of a test window, but all the days of the testing window. College Board staff are available at 7 a.m. to support your testing. Now, the thing to know is that when you call in and you hear the menu of choices, even if you're doing any digital testing at all, which you guys are doing, right? If you're doing any digital testing, you need to choose digital testing first. Okay, when you choose digital testing, that gets you to the digital team. If you choose SSD, that takes you to the SSD team, and they support things like questions about requests for accommodations and paper pencil testing, but they do not support the digital testing. So you have to make sure that when you're calling in and you're making the choice, when you call into our helpline, if you choose digital testing, College Board staff is answering the phones on all College Board digital staff are answering the phones on test days starting at 7 a.m. Okay, is that helpful? Great.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
And we will make sure that that is in emails that you get so that you remember coming up when we get closer to test day. But we don't want anybody to not get to people, because there actually are people there to help you. Great. So let's talk about the testing settings and tools. So in digital testing, we have universal tools that are available to everybody, so any student. And you see on the list there's the universal tools, things like calculator during the math test, the 4 calculator section of the math test. There's an expand button, highlighter, marking things for review. There's a number of universal tools there that you can see. There's also a zoom in and zoom out. The zoom in that goes to a certain point. And then there are other tools that are available within the testing platform that are available to students who have approved accommodations for them. And you see there, those are some of them. It's not a full list, but most of them, the ones that are used most commonly, are there under the column there that says adjust student test settings prior to test day. There are timing things. There are supports. There's the 4-function calculator that can be kind of turned on for the math test no calculator section. There are different testing modes that are in there, and additional Zoom options that need to be adjusted for students who have those as accommodations before test day. So that kind of gives you a sense of there are a bunch of things that all students see and have access to. And then there are additional things for students with accommodations. So the SSD coordinator and the test coordinator should work together prior to test day to make sure that the correct settings are configured in Tide for those students prior to test day. And so this gives you this is designed to give you a sense of some of the universal tools that are available in the test in the secure browser for all students. So there are navigation bars, and if you see in the top left corner of that image on the screen, there's a little red box. There are navigation buttons where a student can move back and forth, and there's also a student clock in the upper right corner that students can keep track of the time. There are different test tools, so where they can access the calculator for the math section with calculator, where they can zoom in and zoom out. So those test tools are up in the upper right-hand corner. And then there's also, there's a context menu tool. So if you kind of drop it down, there's those 3 lines, and you'll see that on the right side on that image there. You can drop it down, and that's where the mark for review is. That's where students can see the test directions. They can use strike through. So there are those things there. Our recommendation is that you let students kind of practice and use these tools and see what's there using the student digital test preview prior to test day, so they know what's available to them. So the pre-administration session, we strongly recommend that you conduct a pre-administration session before test day. So for the pre-administration session, this is the opportunity. Now you're seeing a PSAT 8-9 screenshot because that's what's available right now. But for the pre-administration session, you'll go into the questionnaire. Now I realize in Connecticut, you don't complete the questionnaire, but that's what the section is called. Okay. And when you go into the questionnaire section, that's where students can choose to designate their score sends for any, if they want to send their scores to any college or scholarship program. It's in that questionnaire section. So you go in there, there's 2 questions that a student answers, 3 questions, and then they can choose if they want to include any score sends. You do that during this pre-administration session, and it's in that questionnaire section. Now, even if a student, we recommend you kind of combine this with the opportunity to use the student digital test preview if you're getting kids kind of all set up and on computers. But we recommend it as important because the opportunity to just practice and see what they're going to be using for testing is good for students, but it also gives you the opportunity, especially if you're doing the pre-admin session in the rooms where you're going to be testing kids and having kids get online, you can make sure that in a low stakes situation, everything's working as it should for your testing. One thing to note about the score sends, because this is a question that comes up all the time. When you have students go into the questionnaire and they choose their score sends, it's their only opportunity to choose score sends. If they want to do it, they've got to do it there if they want to use their free score sends. If they don't put in score sends there, they can't do it after the test. They can't go back into the questionnaire after that session's been completed. So if they want to use their free score sends, they have to use it in that pre-admin questionnaire session. If they do put score sends in and then later change their mind, there's no way for us to get rid of them. So it's important to know, this is something important to understand. We've made it really clear. We've made some changes in documentation this year for stuff that will go out to kids and to proctors and test coordinators, that those are the opportunities. But I want to call it out because it's questions that come up every year.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of questions, and it could be that I wasn't 100% sure on how it worked last year, but now I do. And so we've had a few questions now that came in, and I actually was looking at this slide thinking I must have not carefully read this, because it doesn't take 35 minutes to do the questionnaire like it says here on this slide.
Because you guys don't do the actual questionnaire, it doesn't take 35 minutes. Now it could take time if you're helping kind of troubleshoot getting kids in, if there's challenges getting kids into it could take more. But reality is it'll take you 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops to give kids the opportunity to choose their score sends. Now, if your students aren't going to choose score sends, or you're not going to have that be kind of part of what you do, we will still score your tests without the questionnaire section being done, right? Like, know that. Okay. That said, we still recommend you do it because if students do want to use their free score sends, this is their one opportunity. But also, it is an opportunity for you to test before test day, just that everything is working like it should in your building, and that the bandwidth in your testing room is fine, all that kind of stuff. We had a bunch of schools that didn't do a pre-admin session last year, and that's fine if that's how it's going to work for you. But we did have some schools that faced some tech issues because they hadn't tested it beforehand. So we recommend you do it for that purpose, even if your students aren't gonna choose score sends.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to reiterate all this in some kind of communication to you, because it is a little confusing. So you don't have to do this section, but if you don't do it, students don't have a chance to send their scores. If you do it, students don't need to send scores, but if they change their mind and wanted to send scores afterwards, they can't go back in and do it. So like once you do that section, that's kind of it. Like that's their only opportunity to send scores. You can't go back in, and you also can't change them, unfortunately. Once they put them in, we can't take them away, because I know that was a piece of confusion last year. If they do have access to having, if they are a student from a low income family and they have a fee reduction already in their file, or you give them a fee reduction code, they can have unlimited score sends. Somebody had asked that, and that's beyond the 4 free score sends. And I believe that that benefit is for any time for them to send score sends if they have a fee waiver.
Yeah, if they have a fee waiver, it is anytime. That's available free at any point, unlimited free score sends for students that have for students that are fee waiver eligible.
If you have questions about the fee waiver or how do I get access to it, how do I give those to my students, you can certainly shoot me an email and I can help you get through that, or we can get you information through College Board.
So for testing room setup, you want to make sure test coordinators need to identify the rooms within your building where you will administer the digital test. So again, to remember that you may need additional rooms for students that may have maybe testing with accommodations. When you're looking at digital testing rooms, you should make sure that testing stations are configured to prevent testers from easily viewing the screens of other students, right? You don't want it really easy for them to see the screens of the other kids, right? You need to make sure that there's enough space for the testing devices as well as scratch paper and calculators. There's a calculator in the test, but some students like to use their own calculator. That's fine as long as it's one of our approved calculators, but you need to make sure that on the desk that they're testing on, they have space for that calculator as well as any scratch paper. Students doing digital testing are supposed to be given some scratch paper so they have that if they need to, if they need to work out math problems or whatever while they're doing the test. And that you can't use lap boards. Students have to be at desks. They can't be using boards that are on their lap. Each testing room has to have a dedicated computer for the proctor, like we talked about, a test-taking device for each student, and access to a reliable power source for test-taking devices. We recommend that you make sure that they're in rooms that do have access. You don't need to have everybody plugged in, assuming that they hold 5 hours of battery charge. But sometimes things happen with technology, and you want to make sure that there's a few outlets in the rooms that you're using in case a kid has to plug in. As test coordinators, you need to think about not only the rooms that you're going to have students test in, but which staff members are going to be in there. So you will need to make sure that you have at least one proctor in each testing room, up to 25 students. And then if you have more than 25 students, you'll need to add a room monitor in to support that proctor to make sure that the testing remains secure in that room. So you'll see that there's a chart on the screen. If you have 26 to 50 students in a room, you have to add another room monitor. So you have a proctor and a room monitor, and so on and so forth. It works a little different for students that are testing with accommodations. These numbers are a little different. So the SSD coordinator and the test coordinator should work together to make sure that you've appropriately staffed any rooms where you have students testing with accommodations. You'll always also need one hall monitor at least to be out in the halls to supervise students when there are breaks, just to make sure that things stay quiet and calm and secure in hallways as well. The seating and spacing requirements. So we, if you did paper pencil testing with us, you know that we say no partitions. But for digital testing, we actually say partitions are okay. So you can have students testing with partitions in between them. They have to conceal a student's writing surface or testing device from other students, but they can't obstruct a proctor's visibility of the students. So the proctor still needs to be able to see the students that are testing. The seating distance, you need to have at least 3 feet apart side to side and 5 feet back to back so that students can't see each other's computers. You need to seat students facing, everybody has to be face-to-face seating. If you want to seat students facing each other, which you can do in digital testing, it's only allowed as long as there are partitions in place so that students can't see each other when they're testing. And then students can face the same direction. So everybody's, let's say, facing front. That is still allowed. We recommend the use of partitions with digital testing if it's possible for you. And then we've got a bunch of resources. As I mentioned, the digital testing portal, there's a lot of stuff for there to use. There's all sorts of checklists and preparation tools there. There are different guides and things that are available there. The Connecticut SAT manual, or the digital testing manuals for states that Connecticut SAT uses, they will not be up there on that site. Those will be available on the CSDE site. But there are lots of other printed resources there. There's important deadlines and milestones and technology guides and system requirements there. So feel free to use those if you'd like. There's also, CSDE does a great job of linking to the important documents. So if you go to the CSDE site, there's tons of links to all the important documents on our site as well. Next steps, we recommend you, as we talked about, review the test day planning and digital preparedness information to make sure that you've got the devices you need and that you've got the bandwidth and all that kind of stuff that you need. We recommend that you talk with your technology coordinator to get this moving on your side at schools. And you can begin configuring testing devices and installing secure browsers so you can get access to Tide. Everybody for Connecticut SAT School Day will get access to Tide in early February, but you can download the secure browser now because the secure browser isn't going to change. So if schools want to get started on that, they can do that. And then, like I said, we recommend you have students begin to familiarize themselves with digital testing using the Student Digital Test Preview. There's a bunch of training, and there's a bunch of kind of required training. So we will this year, and this is actually a change that we talked about on Tuesday, so it's a little bit different than what's on this slide now that I think about it. But we have an online training option for you. There are modules you can take. There's one for digital coordinators. There's a Tide training to provide an overview of Tide. There's also digital proctor training and coordinator training for those who may be giving paper pencil testing to students with accommodations. So there's online kind of on-demand modules that you can take. Michelle, do you want to talk about about the other training option?
Yeah, I'll bring that up again. We're looking forward to seeing everybody in person if that's something that you can manage to fit into your schedule. We're looking at either February 8th or 9th. I just need to find a location. But if you can't make in-person training, you can all do the digital training instead. So it'll be a one or the other. And we'll have some other Teams trainings, although I don't know, Teams isn't awesome, but it's okay. It's what we have. Sometimes I think it's not the best for training, but we're going to do a few more webinars. Like we have one next week. We'll be doing one for tech coordinators, and we'll probably do something else as we get closer to testing. So the reason we're picking the 8th or 9th of February, we want to do the training right after College Board Tide opens so that you can be there with your laptops and we can answer questions in person and that kind of thing. So I think that's pretty much it. And then there's digital proctor training that proctors are required to take. And we're going to make it a little bit more streamlined this year. So you don't have to, everyone won't need a College Board account. I think that's what we said we were going to do because there was a lot of confusion and feedback on that made it even harder and more confusing between like the Tide account and the College Board account. So we're definitely going to streamline that, and we'll get you more information. And then yes, next week, November 10th is the SSD training. It won't be the only training we do for SSD, but it's just one to get you, if you don't know how to enter the accommodations online and things like that, we'll be covering that for you. So I think that brings us to the end.
Joanna, I was just going to say, I see your question there. You're asking if proctors did the training for fall digital PSAT, will they need to train again this spring? Yes, for state testing, procedures are a little bit different, so you will need to test again this spring, especially because the fall digital PSAT you did is a little bit different than the SAT. I assume you're talking about PSAT 8-9, Joanna, and if that's the case, it is a little bit different than for the SAT.
Yeah, let me, someone asked where the slides were, and we're going to also post a recording. I did put the link earlier in the chat, but it is on the Connecticut State Department of Education, Connecticut SAT School Day webpage. It's located under the section about webinars. And I also did put it into the file section of this Teams Although, oh, thanks, Dee. It's already posted. The slides are already posted on that webpage that Deirdre put up there. And I did put it in the files section of this Teams meeting, but I know sometimes the access is not, it's weird, like depending on, I don't know. So, I think we pretty much were answering the questions as we went along, but you can certainly feel free to email me and or Deirdre and we'll get back to you. And I do want to thank you again in advance for all the work that you're going to be doing on this. We really appreciate it. And Deirdre, Abe, and I, we all have children in high school right now. And thank you, school counselors. You're awesome. Yeah, you really provide a lot of support. I know that you do, but just thank you from all of us because we know you're really, really an integral part of our kids' experience. And so anyway, just reach out to us if you have any more questions. Thanks, Adrian, Deirdre, Abe, and Keisha. And thanks to all of you that were on the meeting. So have a great rest of the day.